The rope was already around her neck when I put my rifle to the sheriff's chest. 5 angry men frozen between justice and madness under the scorching Arizona sun. The Apache woman's dark eyes met mine for just 1 second. Not pleading, not grateful, just knowing. As if she could see what this moment would cost me, what it would bring to my door when the dust settled and the choice was made. "Step away from her, Morgan," I heard myself say, my voice cutting through the desert heat like a blade through leather. The crowd had gathered like vultures, their faces twisted with the kind of hate that frontier justice breeds in desperate times. But something in her silence, in the way she held her chin high, even with death's noose kissing her throat, told me this wasn't justice at all. This was fear wearing a badge, and I'd seen enough of both to know the difference. Subscribe to the channel, because each story demands days of careful development. And your subscription allows us to continue investing this time in stories that bring you entertainment. Tell us in the comments, where do you watch us from? Just now, that was yesterday. Today, 5 women stood at my door like ghosts made flesh, their horses steaming in the morning cold, their eyes carrying secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. I'd been nursing my coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the mesas red when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Living alone on a homestead 30 miles from Tucson teaches you to notice such things. Visitors out here meant one of 3 things: trouble, more trouble, or news about trouble coming your way. These weren't the men I'd been expecting. The woman in front sat her horse like she'd been born in the saddle. Her long black hair braided with silver threads that caught the early light. Apache, like the woman I'd cut down from that rope yesterday. But there was something different about her, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Authority. Power. The kind that doesn't come from white man's laws. "You are the one they call Thomas Mitchell," she said. Her English perfect, but carrying the rhythm of another tongue underneath. "The one who stopped the hanging yesterday." I set my coffee cup down slow, keeping my hands visible. My Colt was hanging on a peg just inside the door. Might as well have been in Mexico for all the good it would do me now. "Depends on who's asking." She smiled, and it wasn't entirely friendly. "My name is Ayana, the woman you saved yesterday. She is my daughter." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd interfered in the execution of what these women clearly saw as their own people, but there was more in her voice than simple gratitude. There was calculation. "Your daughter didn't mention having family. My daughter says many things, and many things she does not say." Ayana's eyes never left mine, as the other 4 women spread out slightly, their horses shifting restlessly. "She told me you did not ask questions. Did not ask what she had done or if she deserved to die. Didn't matter what she'd done. Lynch law isn't law at all. Perhaps, or perhaps you simply recognized innocence when you saw it." She paused, studying my face like she was reading a map. "Tell me, Thomas Mitchell, what do you know about the silver mine at Copper Creek?" The question came from nowhere, hitting me sideways. Copper Creek was 40 miles north, abandoned for 2 years, since the Apache raids made it too dangerous to work. Every prospector and mine owner in the territory knew its story. "I know it's been closed since '81. I know 3 men died there before they gave up trying to work it." "And do you know why those men died?" Something in her tone made me wish I'd reached for that gun when I had the chance. "Apache raids, according to the territorial papers." Ayana's laugh was soft, but it carried an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "Apache raids. Yes, that is what they wrote in their papers." She leaned forward in her saddle. "My daughter was at that mine the night those men died. She was there because she discovered something. Something that powerful men in Tucson would kill to keep buried." The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture I didn't like. And now those powerful men think I know what she knows. Perhaps they do. Perhaps they will come asking questions. She straightened. Or perhaps they will not ask questions at all. The threat was clear. hanging in the desert air between us like heat shimmer. But there was something else, something that made this more than just a warning. Why are you telling me this? Why bring 4 riders out here just to warn a stranger? Ayana smiled again, and this time there was something almost predatory in it. Because, Thomas Mitchell, you are no longer a stranger. When you put that rifle to Sheriff Morgan's chest yesterday, when you chose to save an Apache woman over your own safety, you became part of something bigger than your little homestead, something that began at Copper Creek and will not end until the truth comes out. She gathered her reins, preparing to leave, but her words weren't finished. The men who will come asking about my daughter, they will not come alone. They will not come asking politely. And when they come, you will need to decide who you really are, Thomas Mitchell. Are you a man who stands for justice, or are you a man who simply made one good choice and hopes the world forgets? The 5 women wheeled their horses around, dust rising from the hooves. But Ayana's voice carried back over the sound. We will be watching. When the time comes, we will know which man you choose to be. They rode out as suddenly as they'd come, leaving me standing on my porch with a cold cup of coffee and a head full of questions I didn't want answered. But the desert doesn't care what you want, and neither do the men with power and secrets. I went inside and strapped on my gun belt, checking the loads in my Colt. 6 bullets probably wouldn't be enough, but it was what I had. The rest of the morning passed quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Like the silence before a thunderstorm, when even the birds stop singing and the air itself seems to hold its breath. I tried to work, tried to focus on the mundane tasks that keep a homestead running, but my eyes kept drifting to the horizon. Around noon, I saw the dust. This time, there was no mistaking what it meant. 3 riders, coming fast from the direction of Tucson, their horses pushed hard across the desert floor. I recognized the lead rider, even at a distance, Sheriff Morgan, the same man who'd been ready to string up that Apache woman yesterday, the same man who'd backed down when I put iron to his chest. He wasn't backing down today. I stepped out onto the porch, my hand resting easy on the butt of my Colt. The riders slowed as they approached, spreading out in the practiced way of men who'd done this before. Morgan stayed in the center, but the other 2 flanked him, hands hovering near their weapons. "Mitchell," Morgan called out, not bothering to dismount. "We need to talk. I'm listening. Not out here, inside." His eyes flicked to the windows of my cabin, assessing. "This conversation requires privacy. I'm comfortable right here." Morgan's jaw tightened. "You interfered with an official execution yesterday. That makes you an accessory to the prisoner's crimes. You want to discuss this where the whole territory can hear?" It wasn't a request. The 2 men with him shifted in their saddles, and I could see the barrels of rifles poking from their scabbards. Long guns meant they expected trouble, or they meant to make some. "What crimes?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Last I checked, no one ever explained what that woman was supposed to have done." "That woman," Morgan spat, "was found at the scene of 3 murders. 3 good men, torn apart like animals, had gotten to them. She was covered in their blood when we found her. Being at the scene isn't the same as causing it. Tell that to their widows." Morgan dismounted finally, his boots hitting the packed earth with authority. "But maybe you don't care about widows. Maybe you've got other interests." The implication hung heavy in the air. In frontier towns, a white man who stood up for an Apache woman was suspect from the start. Add in 3 dead miners and mysterious circumstances, and suspicion could turn deadly fast. "I've got interest in seeing justice done proper," I said. "Lynch law isn't justice. It's just fear with a rope. Is that what your Apache friends told you?" The voice came from behind me. I turned slowly, keeping my hands visible, and found myself facing a 4th man who'd approached from the blind spot behind my cabin. He was different from the others, better dressed, with the soft hands and calculating eyes of someone who made money from other men's work. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "My name is Harrison Webb. I own several mining interests in the territory, including the operation at Copper Creek." The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about yesterday's hanging. This was about whatever Ayana's daughter had discovered at that mine. "Mr. Webb," I nodded. "I've heard the name." "I'm sure you have, and I'm sure you've heard about the troubles we've had. 3 good men dead, my mine shut down, and now my property is being used as a hideout for Apache raiders." His voice carried the reasonable tone of a businessman discussing a minor setback. "It's cost me considerable money and caused considerable hardship for the families of the deceased. I'm sorry for their loss. Don't see what it has to do with me." Webb smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "The woman you saved yesterday was found at my mine. She was found with evidence linking her to those murders, evidence that certain parties might want to suppress." "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that dies with the person carrying it," Sheriff Morgan cut in. "The kind that gets buried with a proper execution." The threat was clear now. They hadn't come here to arrest me or question me about yesterday's interference. They'd come to find out what I knew, what the Apache woman might have told me before they could silence her permanently. But there was something else, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. If they were this worried about what one Apache woman knew, if they were willing to ride 30 miles into the desert to threaten a stranger over it, then whatever happened at Copper Creek was bigger than 3 dead miners. "Seems like you boys rode a long way just to discuss ancient history," I said, shifting my weight slightly so I could draw faster if needed. "That woman never said 2 words to me beyond thank you. Whatever secrets you think she's carrying, I don't have them." Webb studied my face like he was trying to read my soul. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to assume you're telling the truth, for both our sakes. But truth has a way of becoming complicated when Apache war parties are involved." "What war parties? Territory's been quiet for months." "Has it?" Sheriff Morgan stepped closer, his hand resting openly on his gun butt now. "Funny thing happened this morning. Stage from Yuma was attacked about 15 miles north of here. Driver and 2 passengers killed. Stripped and scalped, Apache style. My blood went cold. 15 miles north put the attack right between my homestead and Copper Creek. But something didn't feel right about the timing. That's terrible news, but I still don't see what it has to do with witnesses saw a group of Apache women riding away from the scene," Webb interrupted. 5 of them, led by an older woman on a painted horse. Ayana. They were talking about Ayana and her riders, but that meant... "You saying these women attacked a stage just this morning, after they were here talking to me?" "I'm saying it's mighty convenient timing," Morgan replied. "Apache woman gets saved from a rope. Next day, Apache war party kills 3 more white folks. Makes a man wonder if yesterday's mercy was actually today's mistake. The logic was crude but effective. In frontier justice, correlation was often enough for conviction, especially when the accused couldn't defend themselves in a white man's court. But I'd seen Ayana's eyes. I'd heard the control in her voice. Whatever she was involved in, random stage robbery wasn't her style. This felt like something else entirely, something calculated. "Maybe," I said carefully, "or maybe someone wants it to look that way." Webb's expression didn't change, but I caught something flicker behind his eyes. Calculation. Like a poker player deciding whether to fold or raise the stakes. "Mr. Mitchell, you seem like a reasonable man. A man who understands that the frontier can be a dangerous place for those who misunderstand their position." He reached inside his jacket, and I tensed, but he only pulled out a leather wallet. "I'm prepared to offer you compensation for any inconvenience yesterday's events might have caused you." He peeled off several bills. More money than I'd see in 6 months of working this hardscrabble land. The offer hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. "Compensation for what?" "For your silence. For your understanding that some matters are best left to those with the authority and resources to handle them properly." Webb's smile was all business now. "Take the money, Mr. Mitchell. Buy yourself a new start somewhere else. Arizona territory is big, and there are plenty of places where a man can homestead without complications." It was a buy-off, pure and simple. Take the money, leave the territory, and forget whatever I'd stumbled into when I cut down that Apache woman yesterday. The smart play, the safe play. But I kept seeing her eyes, the way she'd held her chin up even with the rope around her neck, the dignity she'd maintained even facing death. And if I don't take your offer? The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Webb's reasonable businessman mask slipped just enough to show something cold and sharp underneath. Then you'll continue to live here, alone, 30 miles from the nearest help, in territory where Apache war parties are apparently active again. He tucked the money back into his wallet with deliberate precision. Dangerous country for a man without friends, Mr. Mitchell. Accidents happen. Sheriff Morgan nodded slowly. Territory's had a lot of accidents lately. Mining accidents, riding accidents. The kind that happen to folks who stick their noses into business that don't concern them. The message was clear. Take the money and run, or end up like those 3 miners at Copper Creek, but they'd made one mistake in their calculations. They assumed I was the kind of man who could be bought or scared off. Maybe I had been before yesterday. Before I saw a woman facing death with more courage than the men who wanted to kill her. Mr. Webb, I said, keeping my voice level, I appreciate the offer, but I've got crops in the ground and water rights to this land. I'm not looking to sell. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. 4 men with guns spread out in positions that would make drawing suicide. But sometimes a man has to make his stand, even when the odds are stacked against him. What would you have done in my place? When powerful men offer you money to forget what you've seen, when the alternative might be a shallow grave in the desert? Webb nodded slowly, like he'd expected this answer, but hoped for a different one. I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Mitchell. I truly am. They left without another word, but the threat lingered in the air like gun smoke. I watched them ride away, noting how they kept their horses at a walking pace, like men with nowhere urgent to be, like men who knew exactly when and how they planned to return. I spent the rest of the afternoon checking my defenses. The cabin was built solid with thick adobe walls and narrow windows that would be hard to shoot through. I had a good view of the surrounding desert from the front porch and a back door that opened onto a maze of rocks and gullies where a man could lose himself if he had to. Water was the weak point. My well was 20 yards from the cabin, exposed to fire from anyone with a rifle and patience. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight's problem was staying alive long enough to see tomorrow. As the sun started its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, I found myself thinking about Ayana's words. She'd said I was part of something bigger now, something that started at Copper Creek. Whatever those miners had found up there, whatever Webb was so desperate to keep buried, it was worth killing for. The question was, what made a played-out silver mine worth 3 lives and possibly more? I was still pondering that when I heard the hoofbeats. A single rider this time, approaching from the east at an easy lope. I stepped onto the porch with my rifle, squinting against the setting sun to make out the figure. As the rider got closer, I could see it was a woman, slight of build, riding bareback on a paint horse. Apache, but not one of the 5 from this morning. She stopped just outside rifle range and raised her hands, showing she was unarmed. Then she cupped her hands around her mouth and called out in perfect English, "Thomas Mitchell, I bring word from Ayana. The men who visited you today, they ride to kill you tonight." My heart hammered against my ribs. "How do you know this?" "We have been watching. They wait at Miller's Rock until dark, then they come. Ayana says you must choose now, die alone or live and learn the truth." Miller's Rock was 2 miles south, perfect cover for men planning an ambush. If they attacked after dark, I'd never see them coming until it was too late. "What truth?" I called back. The young woman reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out something that glinted in the fading light. She threw it toward the cabin, and it landed in the dust halfway between us. "Ayana says you will know when you see it. She says to tell you the silver was never the treasure they were digging for." Before I could respond, she wheeled her horse around and vanished into the gathering dusk, leaving me alone with her warning and whatever she'd thrown at my feet. I approached the object carefully, rifle ready. It was a chunk of rock about the size of my fist, but when I picked it up and examined it in the lamplight, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't silver ore. It was something far more valuable and far more dangerous. Gold, raw, unrefined gold, the kind that could make a man rich beyond his wildest dreams, the kind that men would kill for, die for, and cover up murder to possess. But there was something else embedded in the rock that made my blood run cold. A piece of metal, corroded green with age, but still recognizable. A Spanish coin. Old Spanish gold. The kind that meant only one thing in this part of the territory: treasure, not just a gold vein, but a cache. A Spanish treasure hoard, buried somewhere in the mountains near Copper Creek and discovered by 3 miners who thought they'd struck it rich. 3 miners who died before they could file their claims or tell anyone what they'd found. 3 miners whose deaths had been blamed on Apache raids, when the real killers were white men who wanted the treasure for themselves. I understood now why Webb was so desperate to silence Ayana's daughter. She'd been at Copper Creek when those men died. She'd seen who really killed them, and she'd taken evidence that could hang the real murderers. Evidence like the chunk of gold and Spanish silver I now held in my hands. The sound of approaching hoofbeats snapped me back to the present. Multiple riders this time, moving fast in the darkness. Webb and his men, coming to finish what they'd started. I had maybe minutes before they reached my cabin. Minutes to decide whether to run or fight, whether to take my chances in the desert darkness or make my stand here where I had cover and water. But as I checked the loads in my rifle and positioned myself behind the thick adobe wall of my porch, I realized the decision had already been made. Yesterday when I put my rifle to Sheriff Morgan's chest. This morning when I refused Webb's money. I was Thomas Mitchell, and this was my land. If they wanted me dead, they'd have to come and take it. The first shot shattered my front window, sending glass cascading onto the floor like deadly rain. I'd been expecting it, crouched behind the overturned table I'd dragged in front of the window, but the sound still made my heart jump. "Mitchell!" Webb's voice carried across the desert night. Last chance to be reasonable. I didn't waste breath on an answer. Instead, I sent 2 quick shots toward the muzzle flash I'd seen from their first volley. Someone cursed in the darkness, a good sign I'd come close. "Burn him out," I heard Morgan say, his voice carrying on the still air. "Place is nothing but adobe and timber. It'll go up like a torch." Fire. I should have thought of that. Most frontier cabins were built to stop bullets and arrows, not flames. Once they got a blaze started, I'd have to choose between burning alive and running into their guns. But fire takes time to spread, and time was what I needed most right now. I crawled to the back window, staying low, and peered out into the darkness. The moon was just a sliver, which worked in my favor. If I could slip out the back while they were focused on the front, I might be able to work my way around behind them. Another shot punched through the front wall, followed by 2 more. They were keeping me pinned while someone worked their way closer. Professional tactics, not the kind of wild shooting you'd expect from angry townspeople. These men had done this before. I was reaching for the back door when I heard something that made me freeze. A woman's voice calling out in Apache, followed immediately by the distinctive war cry that had terrified settlers for generations. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from 3 different directions, but now it wasn't all aimed at my cabin. Shouts of confusion and pain echoed across the desert as Webb's men found themselves caught between my position and attackers they hadn't expected. Ayana. She'd kept her word about watching, and now she was evening the odds. I took advantage of the chaos to slip out the back door, my rifle ready. The darkness was complete here in the shadow of my cabin, but I could hear the battle raging on the other side. At least 6 different weapons firing, maybe more. Working my way around the side of the building, I caught sight of muzzle flashes scattered across the desert floor. Webb's men had taken cover behind rocks and scrub brush, but they were surrounded now, caught in a crossfire they hadn't planned for. I lined up my rifle on a flash of gunfire about 30 yards out and squeezed the trigger. The flash disappeared, replaced by a groan that carried clearly in the desert air. "Webb!" I called out. "You wanted to talk. Let's talk." The shooting tapered off, replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the groans of wounded men. "Mitchell!" Webb's voice came from somewhere to my left. "Call off your Apache friends. We can still settle this like civilized men." "Funny how civilization looks different when you're the one being shot at," I replied, trying to pinpoint his position by the sound. "Maybe we should have had this conversation before you decided to burn me out. The woman you saved yesterday is a murderer. She killed 3 innocent men. Did she?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the chunk of gold ore. "Or did she just witness the wrong kind of murder?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "I don't know what you think you found," Webb said finally, "but whatever it is, it's not worth dying over." "That's where you're wrong," I replied. "See, I've had some time to think about this, about why a businessman would ride 30 miles into the desert to threaten a farmer, about why 3 miners would die at an abandoned claim that everybody knew was played out." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Then I got to wondering what else might be buried up at Copper Creek. What kind of treasure would be worth killing for, worth covering up murder to possess? Another long silence. When Webb spoke again, his voice had lost its reasonable businessman tone. "You're making a mistake, Mitchell. A big one. There are powerful people involved in this. People with resources you can't imagine. Walk away now, and maybe you live to see another sunrise. Like those 3 miners lived." I shifted position, moving closer to where I thought his voice was coming from. "Like that Apache woman was supposed to live after her hanging." A muzzle flash erupted from a cluster of rocks to my right, but the shot went wide. I put 2 bullets into the rocks and was rewarded with a cry of pain. "Webb!" The voice belonged to Sheriff Morgan, and it was tight with pain. "I'm hit! We need to get out of here!" "Nobody leaves," came Ayana's voice from the darkness, speaking English now. "Not until truth is spoken." She emerged from behind a boulder, her rifle trained on the rocks where Webb was hiding. Behind her, I could make out the shapes of her 4 companions, all armed, all positioned to prevent escape. "Thomas Mitchell," she said without taking her eyes off Webb's position. "Show them what my daughter found." I held up the chunk of gold ore so it caught what little moonlight there was. "Spanish gold, gentlemen, old Spanish gold mixed with silver, the kind that comes from treasure hoards, not mining claims." "You don't understand," Webb's voice was desperate now. "That gold belongs to investors back east, legal investors who filed proper claims." "Did they?" Ayana stepped closer, her rifle never wavering. "Did they file claims on treasure that was buried before their grandfathers were born? Did they pay for the blood of the men who found it first?" The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture of greed and murder that made my stomach turn. The miners hadn't just found a gold vein. They'd discovered a Spanish treasure cache, probably hidden during the Indian Wars of the previous century. Legally, such finds belonged to whoever discovered them, not to mining companies with purchased claims. But 3 poor miners with a treasure hoard would have been hard for wealthy men to control. Much easier to kill them and claim the treasure had always belonged to the legal claim holders. "The woman you tried to hang," I said, understanding flooding over me. "She saw you kill those miners, didn't she?" Webb's laugh was bitter. "She saw more than that. She saw where the treasure was hidden." "Você está absolutamente certo. Vou finalizar agora com o capítulo final." "Desci." "Where?" I demanded, my rifle trained on the rocks where Webb was hiding. "Where is the treasure hidden? You think I'm going to tell you?" Webb's voice cracked with pain and desperation. "You think I'm going to hand over millions in Spanish gold to a dirt farmer and a bunch of savages?" Ayana's rifle never wavered. "My daughter already told us where it is buried. She watched you torture those miners before you killed them. She heard them beg for their lives as they revealed the location. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Those 3 miners hadn't died quickly in some Apache raid. They'd been tortured for information, forced to reveal the treasure's location before being murdered by the very men who now claimed to be their legal heirs. That Apache girl, Morgan groaned from wherever he'd taken cover. She was supposed to die with them, but she got away in the dark. Been hiding in the mountains ever since, watching. Watching you file false claims, I said, understanding the full scope of their crime now. Watching you bring in investors with legal-looking paperwork for a treasure that never belonged to any of you. Webb's laugh was bitter. Legal? You want to talk about legal? That gold was buried by Spanish conquistadors who murdered thousands of Indians to steal it in the first place. At least we're not savages about it. No, Ayanna said quietly. You are worse than savages. Savages kill for survival, for territory, for honor. You kill for paper money from men you have never met. A shot rang out from the rocks, wild and desperate. Webb was making his last play, but his aim was off. The bullet went wide, striking the side of my cabin with a solid thunk. I didn't give him a chance for a second shot. My rifle cracked twice, the bullets sparking off stone. A cry of pain echoed across the desert, followed by the sound of a weapon clattering against rock. "Webb!" I called out, "and it's over. Come out with your hands up." Silence. Then the scrape of boots against stone, and Harrison Webb stumbled into the moonlight, his left arm hanging useless at his side, his face pale with blood loss and shock. "You don't understand," he said, swaying on his feet. "The investors back east, they're not the kind of men you cross. They have resources, connections. Kill me, and they'll send 10 more like me. Then we better make sure they get the right message," I replied. Ayanna stepped forward, her rifle still ready but pointed downward now. "The treasure belongs to the people of this land. Spanish gold stolen from our ancestors, hidden by conquerors, found by honest miners who died for their discovery." "What are you proposing?" I asked. "Justice," she said simply. "The gold will be returned to those who deserve it. The Apache bands who never received the treaty payments promised by your government, the families of the murdered miners, the Mexican villages whose people were slaughtered for this treasure centuries ago." Webb laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "You think the territorial government will let that happen? You think Washington will just hand over millions in gold because an Indian woman says it's right?" "Maybe not," I admitted, "but they might listen when they hear about 3 American citizens tortured and murdered by their own business partners." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the chunk of gold ore again, letting it catch the moonlight. "Especially when there's evidence. Physical proof of what you found, what you killed for. That won't hold up in any court," Webb protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Won't it?" Ayanna smiled, and for the first time since this began, it reached her eyes. "My daughter is not the only witness. There are others, Mexican traders who saw your men at Copper Creek on the night of the murders, Apache scouts who watched you move the treasure, even a white prospector who saw too much and was paid to stay quiet." The web of conspiracy was unraveling, and Webb could see it happening. His face went from pale to gray as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. "Sheriff Morgan," I called out, "you still alive over there?" A groan answered me. "I'm hit bad, Mitchell. Need a doctor." "Then I suggest you start talking. Tell us about your part in this, and maybe you live to see trial instead of bleeding out in the desert." The confession came in bits and pieces, interrupted by Morgan's labored breathing and Webb's increasingly desperate protests. But the picture that emerged was clear. A conspiracy of greed that had claimed 3 innocent lives and nearly claimed more. As dawn broke over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold that seemed fitting somehow, I found myself looking at a changed world. The gold would be distributed, as Ayanna had promised, to those who had suffered for it. Webb and Morgan would face territorial justice for their crimes. And I would remain on my land, no longer a simple homesteader, but a man who had chosen justice over safety, truth over convenience. Sometimes the frontier changes you in ways you never expect. Sometimes standing up for what's right is the only choice that lets you sleep at night. The Apache woman I had saved from hanging rode up as the sun cleared the mountains, her face peaceful for the first time since I'd met her. "The truth has been spoken," she said in perfect English. "Justice has been served." I nodded, watching as Webb and the wounded Morgan were loaded onto horses for the long ride to Tucson and trial. "Justice," I repeated. "Sometimes it takes longer than you'd like, but it comes." She smiled and rode away, disappearing into the desert morning like a ghost made of sunlight and memory. I was alone again, but somehow I didn't feel lonely anymore.